Hello everyone, welcome to Field Notes, an exploration of functional medicine. I'm Rob Downey, a family practice MD and Institute for Functional Medicine certified practitioner. I'm coming to you from Seaworthy Functional Medicine in Homer, Alaska. Seaworthy exists to help people overcome their health challenges and be fully vital. Today we are fortunate enough to have with us Tiffany Flaten, a board certified nutritionist and expert in thyroid issues. Good morning, Tiffany.
Good morning.
What's the morning like in Minnesota?
It is sunny. It is not windy for a change. It's been so windy lately, and it's actually a really beautiful day. Sunny and warm.
We chatted a little bit before starting today that my family practice residency was in Minneapolis. And did you tell me a minute ago where in Minnesota you are?
I am probably about 30 minutes or so from the city. Outside of the city, yep.
Must be pretty.
Yeah, it is nice.
I always found the countryside of Minnesota really beautiful.
Yes, it really is.
Super. So I'll summarize your bio, and then please, as we segue in, add anything either that needs to be corrected or amplified. So you're a board certified nutritionist. You have a personal background of thyroid cancer, which is sobering to say the least. Mm-hmm. And then that influenced your need or desire to understand more about thyroid function and help others with thyroid issues. You have the group of folks that you tend to help most often or focus on are women 35 to 65 with thyroid issues. There's also this emphasis then on everyone needing to know what normal thyroid labs are, and people can work with you remotely. You have a number of programs, and we'll definitely want to talk about it. You've got a book coming out.
Yes, very exciting.
Are there things I should add to your bio today?
No, I think that kind of summarizes it, that I had my own experience and had to use nutrition. I mean, that's what it came down to, is using nutrition to actually help me feel better after going through the process of, all the things you do for thyroid cancer. And that's what did it for me. So I think you covered it.
How many years ago were you diagnosed?
I was diagnosed with cancer in 2007.
And I'm sure that will make our listeners anxious, so I presume you're in a good solid remission?
Well, I've honestly never heard the words remission, so I feel that's very confusing. I still find that confusing because I feel like I should be, because this was the easy cancer. This is the one that is, and it's very treatable. The version of thyroid cancer that I had, it did metastasize to the lymph nodes. I don't know if that has caused some of the ups and downs, but I've had many, many, many ups and downs from that diagnosis in 2007 to even as recent as January 2020. So it's just constant monitoring, and I had one recurrence in the lymph nodes, but other than that, I feel like I'm in remission. I act as if I'm in official remission, even though I just have never heard those words. So I'm not exactly sure if that's a methodology or the way that they practice at that clinic, or
Yeah, and I should probably add for our listeners that can be one of the dilemmas for so many functional medicine patients, is that the terminology sometimes again ends up being sort of mechanistic or black and white, and in contrast then the person is vital at 13 years and doing really well, and so some of the words fall apart a little bit.
Right. Yeah, it's very different how I hear different stories about how people kind of navigate through this, and I feel like every person's experience is extremely different with how they're, like, the terminology. And I think obviously that the time frame in 2007, my diagnosis and treatment and whatever, it probably looks very, very different for someone diagnosed newly right now in 2020. So It's just all the things that change with it, and it's just a little hard to navigate sometimes, but that's where I stuck to nutrition for me.
And yeah, that's, I think, a perfect next item is, did you know in 2007 that nutrition was critical? Were there any suboptimal nutrition issues coming in that you think might have been part of how this kind of thing ended up happening? How did you have that aha moment that nutrition was going to be a big deal for you?
I didn't, because I always had been very interested in nutrition and fitness and that type of thing. I've always been active, very interested in how food affects how you feel, but I didn't quite get it from that functional perspective, because I was still in the mindset of what so many people are thinking, even today, where I'm trying to help, unlearn that for some people, is the things you hear on the news or on commercials or from your friend's mother-in-law that did some kind of diet, whatever it is, like all the different food rules. I was going by that because I thought those were the healthy ways to do things, because they've been talked about so much, and I've been told it's going to make all the difference in the world for you. But if you don't know how those things are really affecting you, what your nutrient status is and how it's affecting you, you can't really, you don't really get it. And so when I brought this to my doctor, the doctor that was dealing with the thyroid cancer and going through the treatment, I did all the typical treatment. I had the thyroid removed. It was pretty large nodule, cancerous nodule. And like I said, it had metastasized the lymph nodes. So I had lots of lymph nodes removed. Then I did the radioiodine. I did, a bunch of scans. Since then, I've done lots of PET scans and I've done other treatments. I've done the diagnostic treatment, the Thyrogen. I don't know if many people have heard of that or have that. But I've done lots of those things. And throughout it, in the beginning stages at least, I was under the impression that once I did all that, my symptoms that I'd had for years, since at least high school, headache, malaise, fatigue, like unbelievable fatigue. I can't even describe how tired and non-functional I felt. I was under the impression that once I did all of those typical treatments and got my medicine, I would be good. All those symptoms would go away, and it didn't. And so I brought the nutrition piece to my doctor and said, "What about nutrition?" And he said, "Well, food doesn't really affect how you feel, and just eat healthy." Mm-hmm. And then I knew, okay, I need to look into something deeper than that, because I just knew instinctively, just being very interested in that my whole entire life, that I needed to look into that further. And so I sought other help for it.
And you mentioned a moment ago, Tiffany, that a functional medicine perspective ended up being helpful on those extra dimensions of nutrition. Did I hear that accurately?
Yeah. And I don't think at the time I knew that that's what I didn't have that terminology in my brain. It was just, I knew that there had to be something more. And that is the one thing that at the time I felt like I didn't really dive into, because I thought I was already eating pretty well, because our house ate much better than most of the people, in our circle, like with the kids and cooking at home and that kind of stuff. But I didn't look at it deeper than that. It was just very surfacey, and it wasn't specific to my needs. And so that's the piece that kind of instinctually I just needed to look into further. And then, like I said, I sought help I found a functional nutritionist, and it blew my mind away that within, I went by some of her recommendations. And this is probably 3 years after the initial diagnosis too. So it was a process. And I took some of her recommendations, and I was like, whoa, in 1 or 2 weeks, the fog started to lift. Anxiety, depression, sleep, energy, blood sugar balance, like all the things started to improve in just a couple weeks. And I had felt like this for way more years than when I was actually diagnosed with cancer. Like many, many years before that, I had been feeling terrible.
So sounds pretty clear that there was some serious thyroid dysfunction as a precursor, and I think we'll want to delve into that for our listeners today, that there's a big difference between conventional diagnoses of whether the thyroid's having trouble or not versus what I think you and I are talking about today, which is optimal versus suboptimal thyroid function, sensitization of the cells in the body. So give us examples of the nutrition changes you made. It's a little bit like a business going from good to great. Do you think that's an accurate metaphor?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's not always that profound. I think for people, if they're not feeling the challenges and the struggles that I was, it's probably not going to be that huge of a difference when you make changes. But I think a lot of people that come to me, I'm sort of their last resort. They're feeling as bad or worse than I did. And so they get some great improvement in a short amount of time. So some of those things are just, getting rid of a lot of the inflammatory foods, i.e. processed foods. If you just kind of wrap your brain around eating whole foods for the most part, that alone can start to level things off, help with some brain fog, help with some energy. It kind of naturally balances blood sugar, which gets you off that blood sugar roller coaster with the symptoms of fatigue and insomnia, and when you're hangry, that hungry and angry, when your blood sugar drops too low. Like, people are dealing with that all day long, and it's exhausting, physically, mentally, biochemically. And so just that alone was where that started for me, just eating more whole foods than probably I ever had before. And that was the start of it.
And even though your household was better by comparison, perhaps, than the standard American diet, acronym SAD for obvious reasons.
Right. It fits.
You, in retrospect, then some processed food, some optimal nutrition, there was definite room for improvement in your household. Am I hearing that accurately?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it was sort of, taking stock of some of the things that we would purchase. Again, mostly cooked, dinners that were from scratch most of the time. But there was a lot of room for lunches being, when I would go to work, quick lunches, I would get the lean cuisine things, things like that, because then it was reduced calorie. And so I thought, well, at least I'm doing that. Well, then I would eat that at lunch, probably standing up at my desk or something like that. And then I was very, very hungry. My blood sugar would have dropped by, an hour or two later. So it was things like that where I made changes and, cooked a real breakfast and not like a breakfast bar on the way to my job. I was a teacher. So I would actually cook a breakfast, get up 5 minutes early, make some eggs, some spinach, put that together, and then make an actual lunch or heat up leftovers or whatever for lunch, rather than throw in a box of lean cuisine or, whatever frozen meal it was. And that, in my mind, that's what I was saying. I thought that those boxed frozen meals were healthy because they were, they had the natural
right
on them.
Right.
And they also were reduced, calorie controlled. So I thought also that was healthy. And that's what I was saying before, was that I kind of went by conventional wisdom when it came to nutrition at the time too, but just our day-to-day overall, in comparison to sort of our peers, we were a lot healthier, but still a lot of room for improvement.
I find with my patients, given that Institute for Functional Medicine is always any food path forward, given that there's 6 to 10 sort of recognized food paths by IFM, some more prominent than others, they're all whole food. And I've had this experience as I made these changes for myself for whole food, and I've noticed it with my patients, that a lot of us kind of think we're eating whole food, but then when we actually take the deliberate act, I've even noticed, actually, have you noticed that the folks that are following through on your recommendations, one of the ways to know that they've taken the plunge is that they say, oh my gosh, this is turning my pantry upside down. Now shopping's more challenging. I'm having to allocate more time.
Right. Yeah. Yes, it's definitely a shift in all kinds of behavior, not just what you're actually putting in your mouth, but how you shop, how you stock your pantry, how you stock your fridge, how often you prepare, and it can be daunting for some.
Yeah, it's so important. I want to underscore what you said before we keep going on with your areas of expertise as a thought leader in this, in that I have also found then that two traps for folks are that if I invite or encourage them to eat whole food, some of them are intimidated and they assume I'm going to ask them to live like a monk. So they're thinking, okay, here comes the dirt and bark. And I have found that this last annual international conference for Institute for Functional Medicine, which was done televised this time last week rather than in person, the term from one of the experts was that people's food plans need to be unapologetically delicious. And I have found that's one of the parts of the success of my whole food plans. I absolutely love all the whole food I eat. I would, if somebody put any of it in front of me, I'd say, oh, this is awesome. It doesn't feel like I'm choosing between the food that's good for me and the food that I would love to eat. What's your take on that?
Yeah, that's actually a part of how my plan is designed for this book that you had mentioned earlier. Is it takes kind of a little bit sometimes for people to change their palate so that those whole foods are delicious to them and they're actually excited about the, I don't know, steamed vegetables or roasted vegetables or whatever it is. It takes maybe a minute for people to kind of get used to that and that be their normal versus, whatever a side might be with their meal, like, I don't know, potato chips or whatever it might be. It takes a little bit for people's palates to change, but that's why it's really important. Kind of what you said with what IFM was saying, that you need to love the food that you're incorporating into your diet and in your life, is that you have to sort of make those changes a little bit over time so that it's not this shock to your system and that it's actually sustainable to do that versus just, I'm going to only eat, raw, vegan, whatever, for here until the end of time. That's not sustainable, and you're not going to have success with that. So it has to be sort of a slow gradation. Everybody starts from a different place. I mean, I've worked with people who, when you give them a recipe, for example, or a meal plan, and it includes, say, jasmine rice or something like that, and they're only used to using minute rice or something. So they're like, what do you mean there's other kinds of rice? Well, I start at a different place with them versus someone who's already been cooking whole foods. They still have some symptoms and they need to, tweak things, and maybe we need to get down to the nitty gritty of some deficiencies they may have and that kind of thing. So it's everybody starts at a different place, I guess, is what I would say to that.
I'm so glad we're talking about this because I have a suspicion at this point in my career, and I think that thought leaders almost at every level, whether it's day-to-day care of patients, getting a number of years into doing this kind of work, reading Mark Hyman, David Perlmutter, Isabella Wentz, so many of them are flagging that the folks that are successful with these food plans are forming these food friendships. They're having an aha moment over their supper with their family. Wow, this jasmine rice that Tiffany gave us is beautiful and delicious. Who knew? Who knew if you took the time to put some coconut oil or a little clarified butter on the veggies that suddenly they become savory, and if you add the right spice and you make them fork tender rather than cooked to within an inch of their life. It's the first ever broccoli that even that the mouth said, oh, yummy, give me more. These are the little snowballs at the top of the hill that start
Yeah.
gathering momentum, and then a month later, a year later, people are rolling in, I think, such an authentic, sustainable way, as opposed to out of a sense of obligation or should.
Or just to a means to an end. I think there's that, that diet mentality. I don't like the word diet because it usually conjures up restriction and punishment and that kind of stuff. But we know what we mean by that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it just causes people to, I don't know, they just have to change their palate over time, and it's a gradation of improvements, and then they have, at the end of the day, they're feeling amazing, rather than just, I'm going to eat really restrictive, really low calorie, really icky foods that I don't know how to cook just to lose X many pounds. That's
Mm-hmm.
kind of the mentality. And if we're looking at healing, restoring the body, reducing symptoms or eliminating symptoms, that's a whole different, quote unquote diet
Right.
than, means to an end, which means to an end, the weight loss diet only, like just if that's your only goal, that's not really going to last and give you any symptom relief at all.
Right. I hope that people listening to us investigate sort of not caloric restriction, but a variety of nutrient dense whole foods, and then things like, so much the annual international conference this year focused on time restricted eating or even fasting, and people eating calorically dense, delicious food, nutritionally dense food over, timed windows. And again, I want to make sure today to go into specifics that our listeners are going to want to hear from you about thyroid. And I'm not presuming you'll necessarily agree with what I just shared, but I worry that there's been such a focus on caloric restriction over the years, and then so many people are dissatisfied because it shuts down their metabolic rate. And just, again, this idea of restriction is really unsustainable, and I think it just feels icky.
It does. And I think people have gotten the idea too. And I have actually heard people that have come in to work with me, that their practitioners at their doctor's office, or whoever they're seeing, have said, as long as you eat within X many calories, doesn't matter what you eat, just don't go over this many calories. And
Yeah.
it's like, it blows my mind, because a box of, manufactured plastic, whatever type of cookies or donuts, does not biochemically, metabolically act the same as something whole food. It just can't. Your body cannot run the same. And people are being told this by their healthcare practitioners.
Well, let's go ahead and explore it a little, because it is so important. And so maybe the easiest example is the one that Mark Hyman uses, where he says that 700 calories of Pepsi is not the same as 700 calories of broccoli.
Right.
And yet, if we tie in this thread we just discussed a minute ago, which is that there's such a backstory here of food being treated as the enemy, dieting then being about avoiding contact with the enemy as the path to success. People's metabolic rate down regulates, so they feel like crap, so then they further restrict, so then their body goes into starvation mode. It's just it's no wonder they would say that they feel horrible.
Right. Yeah. It's going to be hard to feel much better eating like that.
So the folks that you and I work with, I think you've shared already that we hear from them a week in, a month in, 3 months in. Oh my gosh, I'm feeling great. And this is a different food plan that I was doing, but in a way the differentness is this fundamental embrace with food. It's a necessity, but also it's our friend. So if we slow down and gratefully absorb these nutrients that come from food, what's happening with broccoli is the fiber's breaking down, and it's perfectly prepared. It's often got a little something with it that makes it savory or delicious or zesty, and then the fiber in it gets turned into fuel for our beneficial gut microbiome. The chemical elements of the broccoli go in and hit reset buttons on our insulin sensitivity so that our blood sugar resets. There are all of these genetic pathways that are activated. The inflammation is downregulated by the broccoli as opposed to the 700 calories of Pepsi, which is like an inflammation bomb.
Right.
And so and the weight part, I really thought the folks at this IFM conference were flagging it accurately, that our bodies are built to eat when we eat and then to take a break when we take a break. We've got feast famine physiology in an era where we don't have any circumstantial famine anymore.
Nothing like that anymore. But people are so accustomed to wanting to eat all the time because, again, we've been sort of trained by marketing that we need to eat every 2 hours to keep our metabolism up, and we need to eat snacks, and we need to, kind of doesn't matter what it is as long as you stay within that calorie window. That's what we've been conditioned. So what you and I do is sort of teach people the opposite, and it takes a little time to get them on board with understanding you shouldn't eat 10 times a day. Your body does not need to do that. So it's just a process.
Yeah, I hope our listeners also get a chance to learn more about, these experts at this conference mentioned that our circadian clock changes after supper time and starts ramping down. But if we eat after supper, and again, different people pick different windows of time to eat if they do time restricted eating. But these circadian clock experts mentioned that we'll sometimes shut off our sleep clock if we eat after supper. And just me going back to some things that I've been playing with, even over the week since the conference, I just set my window back to sort of first bite at breakfast, last bite at 6, and noticed I'm sleeping better already. So many of the thought leaders I talk to hear me saying, oh my gosh, so much of this is about the cobbler having shoes. It's a little humbling.
Yeah, it's amazing that sleep gets wrapped into that restoration of health, which we all know that sleep is so important, but making that connection to what we're eating towards the end of the day, in the few hours before we go to bed. And if you're eating right up until 9 or 10 o'clock, if you snack all night and then go to bed right after that, your sleep is going to be affected. And then that's that vicious circle that just keeps going. And it's hard to get off the hamster wheel if you don't change something and keep doing the same thing and expecting different results. So that's something that is absolutely a part of what we do and teach the people that we work with on this, to look at the whole aspect of their health, not just like one thing, calories in, calories out, or eat more vegetables. It's just a bigger chunk of things we have to do in order to really get people feeling better.
Paradigm change in their perspective. So, Tiffany, our listeners are probably eager at this point, and I want to thank them for listening and learning with us for this session. So when they're thinking to themselves, okay, what are the specifics that Tiffany can illuminate for me about specific foods? Is it zinc and selenium rich foods? What do you do specifically for your people who have thyroid issues as you're helping them have nutrition really move them forward?
It's sort of I don't know, it's big, right? But it doesn't have the person coming to work with me doesn't have to really even realize that. But what we're looking at logistically, I don't do this with everybody that I see virtually, just because of logistics and geography. But most of the time, the goal is to find out where their micronutrients are. That's the vitamins, minerals, amino acids, and antioxidants. Where do those levels fall at the cellular level? And if they are deficient at the cellular level, that is showing us that that energy is depleted. Those little gas tanks of each nutrient are not full enough to get the fuel going and to help our Krebs cycle run and our methylation cycles run, and so we need to replenish those deficiencies. And yes, selenium and zinc, copper, are part of it, but we also need to look at how the carbohydrate metabolism goes for them as well. Are they having a glucose insulin interaction issue? That doesn't mean that they're pre-diabetic, diabetic, type 2, type 1. It doesn't mean you can still have these blood sugar imbalances without a diagnosis, and that's what's showing up on a lot of their symptoms. And so we look at that, and it all correlates to with their gut or with their nutrient deficiencies. We can see if there's some gut health correlations. We can see if there's some anxiety and depression correlations. And when we replenish and restore those nutrients with whole foods, sometimes supplemental nutrition, that helps in, as a whole, just lift that thyroid function up, because the thyroid does not like stress. And I've seen this time and time again with myself, where I've had extra stressful events, especially since the thyroid cancer and having the thyroid removed. My body just shuts down. And I think when people are so behind the 8 ball with so many things going against them, biochemically, physiologically, they've got tons of symptoms, any little extra stressor just puts them back, weeks or months in their journey back to health. And so we need to support the underlying issues, and that helps to normalize what's going on with the thyroid. Obviously, there's people that have the autoimmune component. There's people that don't have a thyroid. There's people that have, just have symptoms, but they haven't been diagnosed with anything because they don't fall into that. They're in the big range, not the functional range of, the thyroid dysfunction. So
thank you for all that. So good. Such good content there. Do you use their history to determine where the macronutrient insufficiencies or imbalances may be, or do you offer testing to folks that you work with? How's that part play out?
Yeah, again, logistically, it sort of depends. Most of the time, if I could, I would have everybody test, the micronutrients with a blood test. But it's cellular level blood test. It's very different than going to get your magnesium or iron level at your doctor's office. It's a much different test, and it's functional. These correlate to your symptoms, and I've never had one test look anything like another. As far as an individual's tests are very different from the next person, and they are very telling. There is connection of the dots like crazy. Sometimes it's mind-blowing how the dots connect, and it's like, well, of course they're feeling like that. There's no way they wouldn't feel like this if you understand some of the physiology of the nutrients and make some of the correlations. Like, we talk about selenium and zinc for thyroid, but nobody ever really talks that much. I guess it's not as common to understand that vitamin A is necessary for that. And when you are a thyroid patient and you maybe more than likely have some gut health issues, low stomach acid, and you have low vitamin A, that thyroid hormone conversion, as well as, gut health, your tissues in your gut replenishing themselves if you're deficient in vitamin A isn't going to happen. So you need to correct those things in order to, help people optimize their thyroid function. So it starts even, downstream from what your thyroid numbers are.
Great, and we'll want to talk about thyroid numbers in a minute, the actual thyroid lab test, because they're so important. But I want to add a couple of things to what you shared, because I think it can give our listeners some examples of how a person with your expertise and then a functional medicine MD can collaborate. So sometimes when I'll have a patient, I'll connect them with an expert like you because they can work remotely. The expertise is super high yield in terms of moving forward quickly. And then if you say, well, such and such a test would be helpful, like in my practice, the functional nutritional analysis I use most often happens to be the NutriVal from Genova. There's many, many good ones. Mm-hmm. And so when people ask me, well, why is this a functional test of my vitamin A? I share with them that Genova isn't actually checking the vitamin A level. It's checking the things that come before and after steps that are mediated by vitamin A. So the functional part is it's testing whether the functions of the body mediated by vitamin A are intact and adequately supported or not.
Right.
And So I think that the new healthcare world that's emerging from this tribe that you and I are part of, including the patients and clients that are so thirsty for this information, is that you and I you can work with them, I can work with them. Sometimes we can use my MD pen to get a test covered, then I can get the results to you.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a new exciting world in terms of the way we're able to serve.
Yeah, it's that collaboration piece and getting, just like you're trying to correct things in your body and your symptoms from a whole basis, like a holistic basis, having practitioners that complement each other, help support each other, are on the same page and working towards the same goals in similar ways. That's going to make the patient just, they're moving the needle to health is going to be so much easier that way.
Right. And from my perspective, a listener could think that what I'm saying is self-congratulatory or what have you, but I take care of so many people that for years they're not even comfortable talking to the different providers on their team about what they do. Things are so siloed historically that many of my patients, they're afraid to let other team members know that they're taking supplements or that they're interested in nutrition, or they're really, really concerned that they've been told things like, oh, food doesn't affect your thyroid, which is it's just shocking. So I think it's a genuine service to patients to have providers with good, solid data, functional medicine data that are aligned philosophically, provide a sense of ease and safety so that patients and clients feel safe and supported to share their deepest concerns, their anxieties, their food confusion, their medication confusion, on and on. I think if they don't have synchronized support teams, they're not fully and adequately served, and a lot of them get stuck, or they get disillusioned or fatalistic, or they drop out.
Yeah, it's that whole reactive versus proactive approach.
Mm-hmm.
The conventional model, and this better than I do, that it's about, here's your symptom, here's your treatment. Mm-hmm. It's not about, well, why is the symptom there? Mm-hmm. What's going on behind the scenes that is causing this symptom, and let's work at that versus let's just mask the symptom. And so that's what I do with nutrition. It's like, yeah, you might need to eat more whole foods, but why? Like, what's going on underneath it all?
Yeah, and as we go in, thank you again. As we go into the labs, people can be interested in, benefit from. I also feel that the foods, by using food nutrition to provide the macro and micronutrients that our bodies want, again, there's something happening more than the mechanistic part of the vitamin A coming in from the food. But it helps to remember that genetically, this is the way our bodies, this is the design. Our bodies want to see the vitamin A come in a food source of vitamin A. That's what, and supplements and nutritional supports have a place. But when we get our food plan right, I always believe and witness both that we're building the cornerstone and foundation of our health by having the foods in place, because there's thousands of things we'll keep learning from the science about why this coming in as the food itself is what our body expects and benefits from.
Mm-hmm. That's what it knows. It's super smart. We just get in the way all the time.
Yeah.
Kind of sabotage it.
Yeah.
Feed it junk and drink too much alcohol or drink too much, caffeine, whatever it is, and we interfere with its process. If we just give it what it needs most of the time, mm-hmm. It can handle a lot of the things.
Mm-hmm. Well, share with our listeners what tests they should be interested in, and many of them will know that it's more than a TSH.
Right. Yeah, if you are a thyroid patient, you probably are very familiar with TSH, so thyroid stimulating hormone, and that seems to be the gold standard for if you have a normal thyroid in the vein of a normal TSH, then you're good to go. All your symptoms that you come to your practitioner for are something else. Maybe we need to take an antidepressant, maybe we need to take some acid reducers, but it's not your thyroid. So that's kind of what people come to me. Those are those people that come to me. They've been told they have no thyroid problems, and I look at their labs and it's only TSH that they've checked. And sometimes it's out of the range and it's still not addressed. I've noticed that too. So it's best if you can get at least one time, if you're sort of suspicious that you have symptoms that totally correlate with, textbook thyroid or, hypothyroid or even hyperthyroid symptoms. If you have a lot of those symptoms, I think at minimum, you should get a baseline of TSH, free T4, free T3, both the antibodies, the TPO and antithyroglobulin, as well as reverse T3. And I know that is not easy to do. And I find myself, the only reason I get those is because I have been treated for thyroid cancer. Mm-hmm. I did not get those prior to, not knowing that there was much more that they could test. I just went by, your thyroid's normal for how many years prior to. And if it was normal, I don't know, the range is just way too big, for TSH for people to function. And that's that difference between optimal range and then the normal range and then the optimal range. And so that's what I really recommend people do, is to find someone who is willing to order the whole panel, at least to get a baseline. And after that, maybe you just do if you don't have any major things, maybe you just do a TSH once in a while or something, if that's what they're willing to do. But I know personally, so many people that I work with, they cannot find someone to run those. And for my own situation with my own child, I could not get her doctor to run anything more than the TSH and free T4 because none of the other numbers tell us anything. That was the thought. I don't understand why that's the case. A lot of people are willing to pay cash for these tests, and not use insurance. So I don't know what is going on with that, but it tells us so much to have all those numbers, and then you can work with things from a different place than if you only have that one number.
It's so important what you've shared, and I think it's going to be so important to our listeners that delving into it's probably really high yield. I smiled when you shared your 6-part thyroid panel, because that's my 6-part thyroid panel. and that's so after 20 years of being an attending physician and 14 years of functional medicine. And I would say that 6-part panel came into focus over the last couple of years after a bunch of really careful attendance to Isabella Wentz, Mark Hyman, Aviva Ram, Chris Kresser, really looking at what a bunch of the functional medicine thought leaders in functional medicine do and check. And I should mention Dan Lucasey at the Institute for Functional Medicine that teaches the thyroid component of the certification module on hormones. And there's some other really important ones, but I have found that 6-part panel is so helpful. And so when I heard you share that, I literally have the image come up from the Institute for Functional Medicine of factors that affect thyroid function. And I found that diagram helps patients. And so this thyroid stimulating hormone is the brain telling the thyroid to make and release hormone. And I always talk with people, if the stimulating hormone goes up, it's because the sensor, the brain, knows that the amount of thyroid hormone in the body is low. If the TSH is low, if people are hyperthyroid, not really what we're talking about today, that low TSH means there's too much thyroid hormone in the body. And then if the TSH is right around, if it's in the 0.4 to 2.5 optimal range, then they're pretty close to good to go. And there's so many things that can trick the sensor. These free hormone levels you mentioned are critical. I'll talk with patients about the free T3 kind of being the gas and the reverse T3 kind of being the brake. You don't want to drive around with the parking brake stuck. Inflammation or toxin burdens, you name it, can make that reverse T3 go up. And then also talking with people that they can have autoimmunity to their thyroid gland and not know it. So the thyroperoxidase antibody and thyroglobulin antibody levels can help the person realize they have some silent or not so silent autoimmunity. And conventional medicine has kind of settled on TSH as the darling of thyroid function, and that's drifting over time. The conventional societies that look at TSH 25 years ago, a TSH up to 5.5 was okay, and then 10 years ago, a TSH came down a point closer to that 2.5 cutoff. Institute for Functional Medicine has noted that one problem with how we ended up with this TSH range that's probably too broad as far as what's normal, leaving a lot of people feeling poorly, is because there were people with low-grade thyroid dysfunction, suboptimal thyroid function in the data set generating the normal data. So we've got a skewed data set.
Yeah, so the normal range is composed of people who were sick, basically.
And right, and so our listeners may feel like, well, how could that happen? And I think it's this spectrum of health issue that comes up in functional medicine where because conventional medicine's gotten a little mechanistic, and I know it can sound unfair to say that, but I think that's pretty accurate, then people with frank disease are the black, as it were, and the white is everybody without disease. Whereas there's this spectrum of optimal thyroid function to frank disease, and there's a bunch of things that are close to disease. Suboptimal thyroid function, a lot of autoimmunity, a lot of stress-mediated inability to generate good hormone levels, a lot of nutrient insufficiency, a lot of toxicity, burdening, sensitivity of the cells to the thyroid signal, production of T4, conversion to T3, over-conversion to reverse T3. So many issues. It's not surprising at all then from that perspective that you'd have this data set. If that wasn't looked for when they generated what's a normal TSH range, well, of course, then the data is going to be skewed high.
Right. I mean, and I've also with the antibodies, touching on that a little bit, I have had people come in, bring me their labs for the last year or two of thyroid labs, and they have TPO in 300s, 500s, and they have never been told that they have this autoimmune piece of their thyroid condition. And one person even has told me that they were just told that they had, it's the same thing as hypothyroidism, and it's just a fancy name for it. That kind of, so it's just sort of downplayed. And so we're not, at that point, they're not dealing with inflammation. They're not dealing with tamping down inflammation so that their thyroid doesn't, fall apart one day. And that's the piece that's missing in that treatment of thyroid. And so that's, again, why people would come to you or to me is to help that, so that you can avoid, having your thyroid removed or having it, radiated so it fries and it's not working anyway. So it's just there. That's what we need to try to do and to educate people on, so that they can actually, thrive and function versus just feel this low level functioning that becomes normal to them almost, when they could live a so much different life by getting everything straight.
And they do. We see it. It's so nice to see that the numbers shift, the vitality shifts, the brain fog lifts, the find it easier to become lean. It all clips together. Yeah. I also noticed that I'm able to prescribe for people where their thyroid function's so far underwater that they need a prescription for T4 or T4 T3 combo, porcine thyroid, or a bunch of variations on a theme there. People are relieved to find out that they can take medication if they need it and optimize thyroid function at the same time. It's not a choice between the two. They can go ahead and sort of do it all at once. And yeah.
And sometimes people, I get a lot of people that are, no way am I going on medication for thyroid. And I'm thinking, you can certainly try to support and optimize it as much as you can, but until you really deal with, getting that TSH back into a functional range, optimal range, and getting those antibodies, if they have those, getting those back down into a better level or normal, or getting rid of them altogether, which is sometimes difficult. Sometimes you need to be on that medication, and people a lot of times, and I don't know if you get that too, being from a functional perspective, if people come to you and they're just like anti-medicine, you know, a lot of them come to me, I'm like, well, we need medicine, we need some of that, you know, but let's optimize and, you know, help our thyroid function with medicine if need be.
Well, thanks for giving me a chance to comment, because I want your clients and my patients and our listeners to get some reassurance there from an MD perspective that the good news about thyroid hormone is it's kind of an outlier compared to so many other pathways in the body. And so, not to be unduly technical about it, but many pathways in the body are negative feedback loops. So if the adrenals overproduce cortisol, then the body has a loop that says, well, I'm going to downregulate if cortisol comes in from the outside. So somebody reads about adrenal fatigue and they put themselves on hydrocortisone from Mexico. They can literally just completely swamp out the capacity of the adrenal gland to make cortisol over a period of months or years. And it's so nice then in comparison that, and there is a place for hydrocortisone, of course, in tiny amounts, but when thyroid hormone is put in as a replacement for what's missing, as a help to get into optimal range, thankfully, we've just sort of lucked out that there's nothing about the thyroid gland where it quits trying to make hormone. When the things that are bogging function down are removed and the supports that are necessary are added, the thyroid absolutely loves to come back online. It doesn't mean that it always does,
Right.
But it's delighted to come back online and produce native amounts of thyroid hormone given the right set of conditions. And nothing about taking hormone weds people to it in a negative feedback loop way. So it's just such good news.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's something people should consider, especially if they have been struggling for a while and they need to get over the hump of, you know, feeling better.
And for you and I, this isn't conjecture. We can reassure people that these are, maybe this is the wrong word, I would say this is artful prescribing. These are very, very specifically chosen amounts of T4 and T3, either alone or together as porcine thyroid prescribing that shift people into the optimal range. And I often find my patients that are embracing the kinds of things that you teach, then their need for hormone goes down, because that's a sign that your plan is working. They're doing what you're encouraging them to do, and then they're able to make more of their own native thyroid hormone. They're more sensitized to the thyroid signal. So then their prescription often drops off, or they wean it back to nothing. That's one of the funnest things to see, given that it's not articulated in the conventional literature that happens, and you and I see it all the time.
Yeah, for sure. It's a great thing.
Well, you've got this book coming out. That's got to be a great place to be in your journey, I would think. It must be a lot of work and a lot of excitement getting close to a publication date in July.
Yeah. So I've been wanting to write a book, and people that, you know, in my closest circle, when I was going through the worst of the worst times, and then when I, you know, not until really getting out of it and starting to chug along and to feel better and to get back to normal. I remember saying when I was so sick, I just wanted to feel normal, and I didn't really know what that normal meant. I just knew that it had to be 1,000,000 times better than where I was at. And so when I got to that space, you know, and people are like, wow, you know, you've come so far. And so then it got to be where, you know, you need to write a book. And I'm like, yeah, I need to write a book. I totally need to write a book about this, because I know that that my story is not uncommon. It might be slightly different from the next person with thyroid conditions or thyroid cancer or whatever. And there's a lot of people that have really great stories of going through thyroid cancer and they didn't skip a beat and everything was, you know, fine for them. That's awesome. But I don't think that is as common as, you know, I think I'm more common, or something similar to my story is common. And so I wanted to write this book so that people could get a quick win, a takeaway with the things and the symptom or the system that I put together, not even really knowing that I was putting it together at the time. I was just trying to heal myself. And that is what has been turned into basically sort of my core program that I work with people to get better. And it's not just thyroid patients that use it and see results. It's people that have sort of those underlying symptoms and they've not been able to fix it no matter what they've done, where they've gone, what medications they've taken. And so it kind of works for everybody, you know, when they're trying to heal and restore their health. So that's where the book has come to fruition now.
Yeah, I'm happy for you that you're well and you're so many years past your diagnosis, and I'm glad your book is going to come out. Everybody I talk with that's done that, then they well, some of them report that it's kind of like bringing a child into the world, because then it's got a life of its own.
Yeah,
and
it is so far.
One thought leader I talked to said that now her people that work with her, they've read her book, so it primes the pump.
Exactly. I think it's that people start to feel, and I know I did. I had many times where I just thought there's no hope. I felt absolutely hopeless about what my outcome, my outlook on life was horrible. And I know that that's common. And so that's the whole point, is for people to, you know, even if they can consume something, you know, a book, without having to jump into this, you know, program or work with someone new after they've been to probably 10, 15 different practitioners over the years. They don't want to start something new, but they can consume something in a relatively short amount of time and get big wins just by some of these changes. And that's sometimes, when you're feeling that horrible, that's sometimes all you can do. I mean, if you can get through, you know, if you have the energy to read a book, then, you know, you can help yourself so much in really short order, because it's set up is in an 8-week system. But, you know, it can be lengthened or shortened depending on the person's needs. And that's where the individualization comes in with my individual clients. But it's something that I just wanted to put together because, again, going back to the quick win things, when I felt that little bit that I made a difference in a couple of weeks, and how much different I felt from being on the floor, non-functional, to having a little, like, there's just a little light peeking through, and I could see a little bit more energy. I could see physically my body changing. That was a huge win for me, and it finally gave me hope that I could actually feel that normal, whatever that is. And I think I'm better than normal now. Again, it's kind of arbitrary, but it's different for everybody. But it was daunting there for a while, and so this is my hope, is to help people get over that hump and that it can be fixed.
Excellent. I want to backtrack before our closing and sort of make sure I understand part of your message properly. You did have conventional treatment for cancer. You underwent surveillance. So you didn't make an either or choice. You did have, for necessary safety reasons, you needed to do the conventional part.
For sure. Yeah, there was no option. And a part of it was maybe that fear when you get a cancer diagnosis and they say we need to take it out, and it's metastasized, and you know it's metastasized a lot in the lymph nodes, and the next stop would be the lungs before spread. Then in my mind there was no stopping me. Did I react? I'm like, get me in, I'll do it. I'll do whatever you say as soon as I can. And, you know, definitely conventional.
It was an imminent and severe threat.
Yeah, and it just felt like there was no option. I didn't even question it, and maybe looking back, maybe I should have a little bit, but just, I don't think, I really, in my heart of hearts, don't think I would have done anything different.
My observations as a physician would mirror that. Not that the agenda today is for us to agree, but I would say I very much would support the idea that it sounds like you did the right thing. You know, hearing about your case, not as the involved physician, but more remotely. So I think because people rely on the forum you and I are trying to create, we're both stewards of our own podcasts. I just should say that from my perspective, again, as a physician and a certified functional medicine practitioner, that functional medicine is not a substitute for cancer treatment. And unfortunately and sadly, I have people come into my office saying, hey, I want to use herbs or botanicals or meditation or whatever to deal with this tumor, confined tumor, a tumor that has spread. And they always hear from me, please, please, please see the surgeon, see the cancer doctor, use functional medicine during to stay healthy and vital, not as a substitute, and then use functional medicine after to prevent recurrence and stay in remission. So thankfully it doesn't have to be an either or choice.
It doesn't. And actually, I just did a podcast episode. It just aired, yesterday it was a high school classmate who got a very dire breast cancer diagnosis, and her oncologist was completely on board with some of the complementary things she was doing with a Chinese medicine doctor and some nutrition stuff. And she used both the very, very conventional, chemo, radiation, surgery, as well as a complementary, and it's amazing. Like, she had great results. So that's what I love about it. It doesn't have to be, like you said, either or. You don't have to make that choice. I
love it about that too. That is pretty accurate language. The related thing as a segue, I think, is that because the approaches you and I are describing are what Jeff Bland, the father of functional medicine, would probably call the right amount in the right place at the right time. Mm-hmm. A lot of folks with hypothyroidism aren't cancer survivors. Some are, but because we're not using too little, too much, we're working in a way that's very much in harmony with what the body expects. You are a living example of providing what the thyroid needs as support does not feed the monster of any, residual cancer cells. And right. Wow, that's just feels miraculous.
Yeah, and that was my goal, even though at the time I didn't quite understand it. I was just in survival mode. It was just true. Not that I never thought and felt that my cancer was going that way, but at the same time, functional, like from the functional perspective, just my day-to-day, it would have been, I might as well have not have been living because I was so non-functional. Mm-hmm. And that's totally how all this was born, was just my stubbornness, tenacity, whatever it was just born out of sheer, I can't live like this. So I just can't live like this. And nutrition was it for me.
I think many of us that had issues where our vitality wasn't optimal or serious obstacles, myself included, then end up being pretty passionate that we want to get the word out.
Yeah, for sure. There's so many things we can do. We just have to make sure that we know that, and then, help people be proactive about it and guide them along the way.
Mm-hmm. Well, you've been so generous with your time today. I had this strong sense coming into this. It was going to be a really abundant conversation, rich with good content. You've been really, really kind and illuminating about some super important topics. So I just can't thank you enough.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me. It was super fun, and I would love to have you guest on my podcast as well.
That'd be great. I look forward to it. Seaworthy exists for people to overcome their health challenges and be fully vital. Please consider subscribing, giving us a 5-star review if we've earned it, and going to our website podcast tab for any questions or comments you'd like to share with us. Thanks.